Today, I'm going to show you exactly how you can color grade your footage inside of Premiere Pro. We're going to be taking this clip here from this to this, all manually using no LUTs at all. Over the years, I've been able to simplify the color grading process into 3 simple steps. This 3-step color grading process works every time on every single clip, and today I want to share that with you. So without further ado, let's dive into Premiere Pro and let's get started. All right, so I've got my clip into Premiere Pro. I've also got Lumetri Color open on the right-hand side, and I've got Lumetri Scopes with the waveform opened up on the left-hand side. Now, if you don't have these opened, no worries at all. You wanna come over to Help, search Lumetri, like I've already got here, and then make sure Lumetri Color and Lumetri Scopes are enabled. Move them around to where you want them to be in your Premiere Pro. And then to make sure you have this exact waveform open, you want to right click and make sure waveform is enabled. Don't worry about the parade, the histogram, or the vector scope for now. We just want to have the waveform open to make sure that we're not pushing or pulling things too far when we're color grading. Cool. Now, with that all out of the way, let's move in to step number 1, which is the correction of our shot. Now, this shot here is shot in log. To be specific, it was shot in the C Log 3 on the Canon R5C. Now, log profiles give you a flat, unsaturated, contrastless image, and that's not what we want to be exporting. We want to make sure we're exporting a nice, deep, rich, contrast-filled, saturation-filled image that looks good and clean. So to do that, we need to take our log footage from being all flat and unsaturated to a space where it looks accurate and true to life. And that's what step number 1 is. So let's do this manually, first by opening up the basic correction tab and then making our way down to the shadows and highlight sliders. The first thing we're going to do is move the shadows over to the left. We're going to start dropping it. Now, as you can see, as I drop the shadows, obviously our image gets darker, but our waveform on the left-hand side also starts to drop down as well, because this is going to give us a live update of exactly how our image is looking and all the represented areas in our shot as well. So now that we've dropped the shadows off a little bit, I don't want to go too far down. If anything touches this 0 line here on the waveform, it means it's pure black. So if I just got the black slider here and I drop this, now you can see we've got a load of information touching that 0 line, which means we have in our image some pixels that are pure black. So we don't want that. And the same thing goes for pure white pixels up on the 255 line. So again, we don't want that either. So we've dropped our shadows quite a bit. Now it's time to bring up our highlights quite a bit. And as you can see, now our waveform is stretching out quite a lot. And that means we're getting a wider range of contrast in our image, which is exactly what we want to do with log footage. So I'm going to continue playing around with that. Maybe increase our highlights, drop our shadows a little bit more. Overall, I'd say this image is a little on the darker side, so I might also look at increasing the exposure just a touch. I know our highlights are getting quite up there, but that is okay. Now, instantly, just by moving these 3 sliders around, our image, our shot, I should say, is looking way more true to life. You can turn off your entire color grade just by clicking this little FX button up here in the top right-hand corner. So if I turn this off and then back on, you can see we've already made great progress, but keep in mind, we are far from done. Okay, so with our exposure, highlights, and shadow sliders played around with and adjusted to be accurate, let's add a little bit more saturation back into this shot. I find 110 is always a nice level. Then we can have a look at our white balance. Are things too blue? Are things too warm? I would say this shot is a little bit on the warm side, but it was shot at sunrise, so that makes sense. And a really easy way to work out if your shot is too warm or too cool is to have a look at the whites in your shot. So if I'm having a look at the whites in this shot, let's have a look at our priest's shirt that he's got on here. It's a little bit warm, but it's not overbearingly warm. We could probably cool this shot down just a touch, but I wouldn't want to go too far. We're looking at, just a touch, minus 0.4. So we're not moving any mountains here. Either way, the whites look accurate. The skin colors look accurate in this shot as well. So overall, I'm pretty happy with the basic tab. I'm going to close this up and then move straight into our curves tab. We're going to jump over creative for now. This is going to be the last place we really play around with the overall contrast of our image. If you don't know how the tone curve works, it's pretty much the basic panel sliders, just in a different format. And I find that it gives you way more control over your image. And I love having a good tone curve workflow in my grade. So what we're going to do is add 3 points to this grade. We're going to add one on this cross section here, which is going to be the shadows. We're going to add one right in the middle of the curve, which is going to be our midtones or the overall exposure of our shot. And then we're going to add another one up here, which is going to be controlling our highlights. And then if you have a look in the bottom left-hand corner and the top right-hand corner, you can see we've already got points there, and that's controlling the blacks and it's controlling the whites. The blacks are controlled in the far left-hand corner and the whites are controlled in the top right-hand corner. Now what we're going to do here, once again, just like the basic panel, we're going to reduce the shadows a little bit. We're going to increase the exposure a touch. We're going to increase the highlights a touch. And then we're also going to add just a little bit of fade by lifting up the blacks ever so slightly. And we are going to do the same thing to the highlights. So lifting up the blacks a little bit is going to add a little bit of fade to the darker parts of our shot. And bringing down the whites a little bit is going to add just a little bit of fade to the brightest parts of our shot as well. Now, overall, just like that, I would say things are looking way more accurate and way more true to life. Now, if we turn off our color grade, this is where we started just a couple of minutes ago, and this is where we are now. We've got color back, we've got contrast back, and this looks like real life. Amazing. This is step number 1 done. Now, usually when I'm color grading, I get to this stage almost instantly, and that's because I'm using my cinematic LUTs. My cinematic LUTs are built around this exact system that I'm showing you right now, but you get to do it like that, which is obviously super nice and very handy when you're editing any kind of larger project aside from just one clip. I've got conversion LUTs, which take care of the workflow that I just showed you. And then I have styling and grading LUTs that you can add on top of the conversion LUTs. And this is going to lock in the style and really give you that final look that you're after. Now, like I said, we're not going to be using any LUTs for this tutorial. However, if you want to speed up your color grading workflow like crazy and get really good results, you can go ahead and check out my cinematic LUTs linked down below. Before you do that, I do want to show you though, just a few of the looks that I have already imported into Lightroom. Now we're going to come into the creative panel here and we're going to make our way down to WhatsApp Blue Hour, Clean, Golden Hour, Jungle, and Moody. Now all of these looks are designed to be used accordingly. So you're shooting a Blue Hour, ideally you're going to use the Blue Hour LUT, so on and so forth. But let's just have a look at what all of them look like on this shot. Let's kick things off with Blue Hour, and we can come down to this intensity slider and we can decrease or increase to get the exact look that we're after. Overall, I like the look of the color change here. We can also turn it off and back on. Yes, it's subtle, but like I said, it dials in that exact look once you've already converted your footage, which you'd be able to do with my conversion LUTs inside my cinematic LUT pack. So that's Blue Hour out of the way. Let's have a look at Clean. I would definitely say I like the skin tones way more in Clean than I do Blue Hour. Moving our way down to Golden Hour now. Maybe it's a little bit intense, but this was shot at Golden Hour. So if we back this off just a touch, that is looking really, really nice. And then let's have a look at Jungle, a little bit more of a cooler vibe. This is definitely not shot in the jungle. If we increase this a bit, you can see the greens really start to get brought out. And just like that, I hope that now you can see how easy the color grading process can be when you have the right tools. Once again, if you want to go and check out my cinematic LUTs and make color grading an absolute breeze, you can do so in the first link in the description. But we are going to continue on with our video. We are going to turn off our LUT just like that. And now let's continue on with step number 2, which is coloring our shot. Now, the whole idea with coloring our shot is to give it that final look, to give it that signature look that we are going to be going after. But it's also making sure that we're leaning into the colors in our shot. Because just like when I started my photo editing career, if you will, I was baking the orange and teal look onto every single photo I was editing. I was wrestling with the colors in the shot. I was fighting to put the orange and teal look onto everything, and it looks trash. So if orange and teal is your vibe, that's great. But sometimes, especially in a shot like this, where we have a lot of greens and yellows, maybe orange and teal isn't the vibe. You can get close, but if you really try and bake it on, it's not going to look great. So let's have a look at how we can work with the colors in our shot to get a nice finished image. So we're going to open up the curves tab again. We're going to scroll past our curve that we did before, and now we get into the color curves. Now, looking at this shot, something that I really like to do is work out what I want to reduce first before what I want to add in. So if I'm having a look at this image here, I'm having a look at the distracting colors. So we've got quite a lot of reds in here. We've got a lot of greens. We've got a lot of yellows. So I might look at toning them down a little bit. At the end of the day, I want this priest, I want our subject to stand out from the shot. I don't want to be distracted by the offerings here, the boats in the back, the leaves in the back, and so on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the hue versus saturation curve, and then I'm going to put a dot just on the border of yellow and orange and just on the border of green and aqua. And now I'm going to look at dragging this down. Not too much, and I might add another dot to sort of even it out. And just like that, a quick before and after, you can see we've taken that edge off the greens and we've taken that edge off the yellows as well, especially in the back here with this tree, right here under this boat on the right, and then also within the offerings to a degree. We are taking just that major hit off, and now, in my opinion, my eyes are way more drawn to our subject, which is great. Now, moving into hue versus hue, this is where we get to change the value of the colors. So hue versus saturation was changing the intensity of the colors. Hue versus hue is changing the value of the colors. For example, let's say if I wanted to change my pre-skin tone to, I don't know, purple, I could put a point around orange and red and orange and yellow, and then I could just boost the skin tone up like that. And there we go, he's purple. Obviously not what we want to do, but let's take full advantage of this tool and have a look at the colors in our shot and work out what we want to change. So I would say after desaturating those yellows and greens, we're left with a bit of a desaturated look, which is fine, but I'd like to turn those a little bit cooler as I don't want them to be on the warm side. What I'm going to do is arguably replicate the curve we have above with our points and then grab straight in the middle and then just move this down a touch so the yellows and greens are a little bit cooler. This clip here honestly doesn't need too much work on the color side. I already really like the colors. The skin tones are accurate because we shot with an accurate white balance and everything else isn't too intense. So we're going to be leaving the hue versus hue curve here for now. I know that I'm not deep diving into these curves, but just understanding how they work will hopefully get you 95% of the way there. And then honestly, it's just back and forward, testing things. Does this work? Does this look better over here? Does this look better over there? And going from there. All right, the last curve, the last color curve we're going to touch on is the hue versus luma curve. Now, this is where we get to change the luminance value of our color, which means we're changing how bright or how dark a color is. Once again, in this clip here, I'm probably not looking at changing anything. But for example, we are going to put our points around green and yellow again. And if I were to lift this up, you can see they get brighter, especially just down here in the bottom right-hand corner. And if I pull them down, they get a little darker. So you know what? For this shot, we're going to make them just a little bit darker to help them stand out less and be done with it. Now, moving into luma versus saturation and saturation versus saturation, I'm only going to touch the luma versus saturation because I think this is a much more powerful tool in my opinion. But this is where we get to choose the luminance value and then adjust the saturation in that luminance value. Let me explain a little bit better. The idea with choosing the luminance value is deciding whether we want to affect the saturation level in the bright or dark areas in our shot. So if I were to put a point right here and then add another point right here, if I drag this down, we're going to be desaturating all the bright areas in our shot. And if I were to move it up, we're going to be saturating all the bright areas in our shot. Obviously, same goes if I were to do it over here. If we desaturate this, we're going to be desaturating the shadows. If I increase this, we're going to be saturating the shadows. Now, something that I do a lot of the time is come in here and just desaturate the highlights a little bit. I don't want the sky to be super saturated in this shot. From memory, it was quite a while ago. It was quite a cloudy day, so I don't want there to be too much of a blue or too much of an orange cast in my sky. So to remove that, I'm just going to drop the luminance versus saturation a little bit and give it quite a large space to be adjusted, and we are good to go from there. And just like that, the curves can be closed up. Let's now move into color wheels and match. This is a super interesting tool because here we get to push and pull different colors into different parts of our shot. So instead of just editing the colors that are already in our shot, now we get to add more color into our shot into different areas. So we've got 3 circles here. We've got shadows, midtones, and highlights. And we can just grab the middle of, let's say, the shadows circle right here, the shadows wheel, and we could push blue into the shadows. Now, if you go too crazy here, it does kind of take control and just go a little bit wild. So tread lightly. For this shot here, I still do want to keep things warm, but I want to do two things. I want to add a little bit of blue into the highlights just to cool them off a touch. And you can see there, I've barely moved that, but we still have had an impact from that little adjustment on the highlights wheel. And then I'm also going to add a touch of blue, ever so slightly, just a little touch of blue into the shadows as well. And then we can balance that out by putting a little bit of warmth back into the midtones, which is usually where our skin tones are going to be sitting. And thankfully for this shot here, our skin tones aren't super bright or super dark, so they're sitting on that midtones line. Now, if I turn this off and back on, the look is insanely subtle, but that's the art of color grading. Small but consistent increments that add up to a complete look at the end of your color grading process. So just like that, I'm going to close up the color wheels and match, and we are getting really close to being done with step number 2. The last tool we're going to open up is the HSL secondary tab. This is where we get to select a color and then change it and manipulate it in so many different ways. And this is where we get to start really having a lot of control over our image. So once again, I'm not really looking to do much with the color in this shot, but one thing I would love to do is make the red in the boats back here a little bit more intense. So let's do that. We can come down here and set the color by picking up this dropper, and then we can click on the part of the image that we want to start adjusting. Now, if I click this little box right here next to color/gray, what this is going to show me is everything that we have selected is going to be colored, and everything that is not selected in this mask is going to be gray. So things are already looking good. If I have a look here, we're selecting the part of the boat that I selected, great. We're selecting some leaves right here in the middle of our shot, and we're selecting this line on the boat right here. Okay, things are looking good. What you can do to refine your selection a little bit more is play around with the hue, saturation, and luminance sliders. For example, if I were to increase the saturation level, all of a sudden we're starting to select way more of the image, and we're starting to select our subject's face, which is his skin tone. Far from ideal, which is not what we want to do. So we're going to back this off until we're not selecting our subject at all, which is looking to be about there. We can then come to luminance, and we can look at expanding this a little bit to see if we can expand it and not select our subject's face, which I would say we're getting a little bit of his face in there, but nothing too much to write home about. And overall, if we continue pushing it, because I've selected a red warm tone, chances are the more we move it around, the more we're just going to be selecting our subject's face. Not ideal, okay? So I'm going to just be happy with what I've selected so far, and then I can come down to the sliders right here, and I can think to myself, okay, if I want to make this more red, maybe pushing things over to the purple side a little bit more in the tint. I can come to correction, and I can add a little bit more red and purple to things, and then I could also increase the saturation a touch, and then we can come back up to this little box right here. I can tick it off, and now things are way more saturated in those areas that we chose, but nothing else in the image has been affected, which is great. But when I look at this shot, I would say things are a little too saturated. So if I just kill off the saturation, it takes away a lot of the changes we make. Maybe we'll increase it to like 107-ish right there. Look, this is more of just an example of how this tool works. Really, it's best used for when you're selecting skin tones in your shot. So if our subject's skin tone was way off, we could come in here, select his skin tone, set that as the color, adjust the settings around it to make sure that we're selecting all of his skin tone, and then come down here and either add warmth or purple or green into his skin tone to make it more accurate. But fortunately for this shot, we don't have to. And there we go. That is step number 2 out of the way. The whole idea with step number 2 is to grade our image, put a look on our image, affect the colors and change things, push things, pull things, take things away, add things in to our shot. The whole idea is this is where we add our style and our signature look. So let's now move on to step number 3, which is masking and vignette. So masking, if you're coming from Lightroom, is a pretty big part of the Lightroom editing workflow, which is great. But you might be thinking to yourself, Zach, things are moving in this clip. How on earth are we going to add masking? Well, compared to Lightroom, it's a little bit more complicated, but it's still definitely doable. Let me take this back to where we were color grading before, which is about here. Now, the way we're going to be adding masks is adding Lumetri color effects to our shot. So we want to make our way out of Lumetri color scopes and into effect controls. Great. We can close up this Lumetri color tab, which is our base grade. By the way, we've gone from this to this. I'd say things are looking pretty good. And then I'm going to come to Lumetri Color and add Lumetri Color Effect. Great. Now what we're going to do is we can use these masking tools here, the pen, the square, and the circle, the ellipse mask, and we can now create masks for color grading changes. So what I'm going to do, the first one is create a vignette. So the reason I don't use the vignette tool is because with the masking workflow, I can completely customize the shape, what I'm covering, and get a really good picture and idea of how big of an effect my vignette is having versus just using the vignette sliders. So I'm going to add an ellipse mask over my subject here. I'm going to include a little bit more of the bottom than I am of the top. We might actually raise this up outside. And then I'm going to hit invert. And this is now going to select the outside of the mask, which is exactly what we want to do. I'm going to increase the feather like crazy. And then I'm also going to expand the mask a little bit more to make it a bit bigger. Now what I'm going to do is come over to the basic correction and we can reduce our shadows a bit. Now what that is doing, if you have a look, if I make some really big changes, you can see that when I increase it, just the outside of the image gets brighter, and when I decrease it, the outside of the image gets darker. So I'm going to reduce our shadows, I'm going to reduce our exposure a little bit, and then if I click off the image, you can see we are drawing a little bit more attention to our subject, which is really important. So if I turn this off and back on, things are looking really, really nice, and I find that adding a vignette to a vast majority of my clips just cleans things up a little bit, and I really love the look. Now, another mask that I like adding to a lot of my images is to just enhance and soften the light a little bit. So, like just before, I'm going to add another Lumetri Color Effect, and then we're going to come up to the top here, and we're going to draw all the way over our clip, just like that. Not including our subject, we're going to expand the mask like crazy, but this time we're not going to invert it because we want to select and edit what is inside of our mask, not what is outside of it. And then we're just going to increase the exposure just a little bit like that. Nothing too crazy. Maybe increasing the highlights over the exposure is probably a better move so we don't fade out any of the darker parts of the palm tree. Just like that, we can increase the exposure just a little bit. And there we go. We're now starting to mask our image. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, wow, Zach, this is great, but things move. Things change. This lady walks into the clip. It's going to look a little bit weird if I were to just select one little part of this clip and be done with it. And I would definitely agree with you. If your camera moves or things move inside of your video, you're going to need to make sure things can keep up with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another Lumetri mask right here, and then we are going to just select our subject's face. This isn't a mask I actually want to add. I just want to show you the workflow for this. So let's say we wanted to select our subject right here, which we've done. We can increase our mask a little bit, increase the expansion to make sure there's no harsh edges. And then let's increase the exposure just a little bit, maybe increase the shadows, increase the contrast a little bit, drop the blacks a touch to make sure he's not too washed out. Okay, cool, things are looking good. Now, if I move this back, you can see that the mask moves around a little bit. Not ideal. So let's come to the beginning of our clip. I'm going to then hit mask path, which is going to add a keyframe. And then I'm going to move the mask over our subject's face, just like that. Now for this clip, we are only moving in one direction, so I'm not particularly worried about going step by step every single frame. But if your clip has a load of movement in it or your subject's moving around a lot, this is going to take a lot longer to do, but for this clip, we're a little bit lucky. So what I'm going to do now is scroll to the end of the clip. Let's say it's here, and then I'm going to move this mask right here, and you'll notice a new keyframe just got added. And that's because we've now set the second location we want the mask to be at that new keyframe. So if I scroll back, you can see the keyframe moves around, and because our subject isn't moving around like crazy, it tracks our subject's face. This is Masking 101 inside of Premiere Pro, and it's super powerful when you dive in and really start to take full advantage of it. But guys, that is going to wrap up today's video. That's step number 3 done and out of the way. You can go as crazy on the masks as you want or as light on the masks as you want. Every shot requires a different workflow. Every shot requires a different amount of masking. Once again, if you want to make your color grading workflow super easy and super quick, go ahead and check out my cinematic LUTs linked down below. They are the LUTs I use on every single piece of footage you see go out on the internet coming from my channels. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you want to continue learning about photography, videography, video editing, or photo editing, you can check this video out right here. and I'll see you over there.